this is our agenda for today. I'm first going to start off with just a little bit of an overview of what is OLAP. And I'll show you what our plan is for these consultations. We'll do a quick review of the current action plan components, just so we're all on the same page, and look at some potential initiatives that we might want to consider for the next action plan. And then we'll move into breakout discussions where we'll talk in smaller groups, some focused questions about what are our priorities for this next action plan. Then we'll come back into the main room. We'll share just some high-level overview or summary of what we discussed in each room. And then I will briefly introduce the online engagement hub and send you off to the rest of your day. So first off, let's do an overview of OLAP in general. As stated in the protocol agreement, the purpose of OLAP funding in Alberta on the French second language side, as opposed to Francophone or French minority language, is to help provide English majority learners with the opportunity to learn French as a second language, and in doing so, benefit from cultural enrichment. Federal funding is delivered through the Protocol for Agreements for Minority Language Education and Second Language Instruction, which is agreed upon by the participating provinces and territories and the federal government. This protocol is a high-level agreement that includes how much each province and territory will receive in regular OLAP funding and the areas of intervention. These are, you can think of them like a strategic framework that outlines the broad categories under which funding can be spent. So once provinces and territories and the federal government agree, which, spoiler alert, takes a while, as you can imagine, once everybody agrees on the terms of the protocol, Alberta then negotiates the bilateral agreement with the federal government, and that outlines the specific details about how funding will be spent in the province. So this action plan that we're talking about today is part of this bilateral agreement. Its purpose is to break down the areas of intervention further and answer the following questions. What specific outcomes do we want to achieve with the areas of intervention? What activities will we undertake in order to achieve these outcomes? And how much OLAP funding will we allocate towards these initiatives? During the webinar today, we'll want to begin to answer these questions, and we want our next action plan to accurately reflect the needs and priorities of the field, which is why we're engaging with you today. Before we go any further, though, I do want to address the elephant in the room. There have been some concerns expressed about OLAP funding being decreased. I will say that all provinces and territories are advocating for increased OLAP funding from the federal government. Many provinces and territories retain some or all funding within the ministry, but in Alberta, almost all of the funding we flow directly to school authorities, and we're not looking at changing this. So what we are looking at potentially changing is the framework through which you allocate funding. So we want to know what's working with this framework, what's no longer working, what are some new outcomes we should aim for or activities we should do. So in a nutshell, rather than discussing how much we're getting, this is a conversation about how we're going to spend what we do receive. So next, let's take a look at the plan for this action plan, because this action plan will not be in place until April 2024. So here we are, December to February, our team's been working at planning and developing materials for this engagement phase 2. So that's where we are now, gathering feedback to inform the priorities for the next action plan. And then, so we've got the webinar today, we'll have the online engagement hub, and then beginning in April, we're going to or into March and into April, evaluate and review all of the contributions from these consultations. And we will develop a report on the key outcomes that we will share through the engagement hub on what we found and what we heard. Then we will develop draft action plan initiatives. Then in the fall, phase 4, we will do another engagement, whether it may be a webinar, it may be just through the engagement hub or both. We haven't quite ironed out all those details yet, but we will engage again on those draft initiatives that we've developed from this engagement, round of engagement. And then once we get that feedback in the fall, we will again report on what we heard from you in that second round. And we will finalize and implement that action plan, which should be ready to go April 1st, 2024. Now, are there any questions about this roadmap, about this consultation, what this involves in general? Okay, seeing no question. There will be other opportunities for questions if things do come up later on. Next, let's take a look at the K-12 French second language initiatives of our current action plan. So again, these initiatives provide detail on how Alberta will spend OLAP funding. And school authorities decide under which initiatives they would like to allocate their OLAP funding. As you know, you don't have to allocate under every single initiative. And as we look at these current initiatives, start thinking about what is still relevant, what we that we work towards, what's continuously important that we work towards, what's no longer relevant, and what might be some new targets that we may want to consider in this next action plan. So outlined in the protocol, the areas of intervention are the framework through which we are required to spend OLAP funding. So these areas are learner participation, provision of programs, academic achievement of learners, enriched learning environments, support for educational staff, and research. And these areas of intervention can be found, the protocol can be found on the OLAP webpage if you just Google OLAP Alberta. They are also in the commitment forms and report forms that school authorities and organizations complete every year. I will say that we may see some changes to these in the next protocol agreement. Sometimes they shift slightly, but they will likely only be small tweaks. Historically, they haven't really changed significantly from one protocol to the next. So we're just going to work under the assumption that these areas will be maintained. Like for the last protocol term, it was support for educational staff and research was one area. And then for this one, they split it off into two. That's just kind of the type of changes that are typically made. So we're going to take a look at each area of intervention along with the current initiatives that are in the Alberta Action Plan for K-12 French second language, so French Immersion FSL. And we'll be using it as a reference during the breakout room discussions. You may notice that we've adapted the definitions of the areas of intervention slightly to frame them as a goal or a desired end state for the corresponding initiatives, targets, and activities. And as we go through each area, think about whether the initiatives that we have currently and the performance targets align with the goal. Think about, is what we're doing helping us arrive at this end state? Also consider the number of initiatives under each area. So in some, we've consolidated related initiatives into one row, as on this slide in the first row. But as we move through each area, it will become apparent where the priority areas are just by the amount of space the initiatives and targets take up. So think too about whether this physical space is still true. Which initiatives do we want to take up more space or less space? And consider what might be missing. Is there an initiative or target not listed that might help us achieve the goal? Are there initiatives we could add that might encourage collaboration between schools, school authorities, or organizations? So first off, we have learner participation. And the goal, or this is actually the definition that we've kind of adapted, but looking at it as a goal, is to recruit and retain learners in second language instruction programs. So we have two separate initiatives for student recruitment and retention, one for French immersion and one for FSL courses. And part of that description is to recruit students by promoting and enhancing services offered in French. And we also have an initiative, French immersion high school retention, where the description is to use strategies to increase French immersion program retention rates from grade 9 to grade 10. Next, we have provision of programs. So this one takes up 2 slides. And so you can see that this area of intervention has the most initiatives. And this is where our focus has been in this action plan. So the goal here is to maintain, develop, and/or enrich a variety of accessible programs, approaches, and pedagogical resources for second language learning and instruction. So one initiative we have is to add French immersion classes, expanding French immersion programs by adding K-12 classes and equipping classrooms with necessary print and digital teaching and learning resources. We also combined a couple other initiatives here. We have 11 French language credentialing centers that we say will continue or to maintain and to expand DELF and DELF opportunities for students and teachers. And we also have an initiative number of students writing exams. So we want to increase the number of students writing DELF or DELF exams. Now, the next slide is also the continuation of provision of programs. And we have 2 other initiatives here related to French language resource centers. So we have one in Grand Prairie, Islay with Edmonton Public, and Southern Alberta French Resource Center in Medicine Hat. So these initiatives are around supporting the acquisition and development of province-wide French teaching and learning resources at these resource centers, and also another initiative to increase the collaboration between these school authorities around the resource centers. So that could include the number of boards that contribute, the number of organizations, provincial, national, international organizations that collaborate around these resources, where collaboration is quite open. Any questions so far about these first 2 areas of intervention? Stephanie.
I just want to be really clear on kind of the structure. So provision of programs, is that comes from the federal, or is that like a provincial? So that's like the federal kind of requirement like this. Okay, then the goal, is that something that is again defined federally, or is that a provincial?
That is defined in the protocol.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's agreed, and it federally, it's from the federal agreed upon by all provinces and territories and the federal government. So exactly. The stuff at the top is from the protocol, and then the stuff in the table is what we are deciding on.
Right. So that's kind of how we interpret how we're going to provide programs with that goal. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to be really clear about which parts come from where.
Thank you. Thanks for asking. That was a good question. Okay. So moving on to the next area of intervention, this is the academic achievement of learners, and the goal being to demonstrate a positive impact on second language competencies of learners. So we have 2 initiatives here under this area of intervention: literacy for French immersion learners, supporting literacy initiatives through necessary resources and supports, and likewise for numeracy. And you can already see there's a lot of overlap between areas of intervention, like resources could fit under this one. This could fit under provision of programs, and that's to be expected. There, at all of them, there really is. One really does depend on the other, and there's overlap. Next up, we have enriched learning environments. This is a cultural enrichment of second language learning programs. So we have 2 initiatives under this one, one around organizing cultural and enrichment activities for students. And we also have another initiative that this one is managed by Alberta Education. It's a student exchange program, Quebec, Alberta Student Exchange. Support for educational staff. This one aims to develop, provide, and assess training and professional development programs for staff working in second language instruction. It also includes recruiting and retaining qualified or specialized staff. So right now we have 2 initiatives under this area. The first is for planning and offering PD, release time, development of French resources, and access to professional memberships. And we also have the individual teacher bursary program. This one is managed by Alberta Education, where we provide bursaries for staff holding a valid teaching certificate and working within K-12, working with K-12 students learning French so that they can attend professional development opportunities or courses in French. And the last area of intervention is research. Conduct research related to second language learning and instruction and disseminate knowledge in Canada. And currently our research initiatives are done by post-secondary. We don't have any research initiatives in the K-12 education portion of the action plan. Another opportunity for questions. That was a lot for just the 5 minutes or so. Martin.
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Slide number 17. So 2 slides before about the membership in professional membership. What are we talking about exactly? So are you providing that or?
This is options for school authorities. Some of them do provide like Canadian Association for Second Language Teachers.
Okay.
Yeah, got it. Okay.
Yeah, so it's at our level with the money we receive. We can, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Okay.
No worries.
Yeah.
Okay, any other? Yeah, Rick, go
Julie,
ahead.
would that also not be where the funding has been allocated towards supporting ARPDC's support of professional development throughout the province in this area?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for clarifying that.
No, I just want a quick note that the action plan we're presenting is for K-12 also identification because it's provincial action plan. Just want to mention that.
Stephanie, go ahead.
I was wondering, is the research limited to post-secondary? I know that we've done some research or partnered with some organizations. We're partnering with SLIC to do some action research on like quality French language instruction and things like that. Is there an opportunity for us to use some of our OLAP so we could report on research? We just hasn't really been done in the past.
Well, we'd want to, this would be to, we could create an initiative around, like if you had a particular proposal, that could be an initiative of a particular research subject. Yeah.
The research subject, like it also fits into different buckets, like it would fit under learner participation or support for staff as well. But I was just wondering if the research bucket was reserved for advanced ed.
It's for everyone. Yeah. As long as there's an initiative there, right? So if we don't have an initiative for post-secondary, then we can't allocate towards it. You get it. Looking ahead now that we've looked at what we have currently, as you've seen, many of our existing initiatives are quite broad and give funding recipients flexibility on how they may want to use OLAP funding to achieve the targets. And we did a scan of other provinces and territories and their action plans. Some of these initiatives that we saw, we put up here that because we thought they might be worth considering, or there's something new that we haven't done, or it's something a little bit more specific that could still fit under our current initiatives, but may not be specified. So it may not be something that folks think about doing. Some of the things that we saw worth noting are transportation for French immersion students to increase access to programs, summer or weekend camps and mini university experiences, grants for school organized trips, EA support for students in French immersion with diverse learning needs, assistance for the provision of technology, including software to support language learning, funding for curriculum consultants. This isn't to say that this isn't already being done again, within our action plan. It's just hasn't been specifically noted in the initiatives. So something worth considering. Is this something that we want to either provide as an example, or do we want an initiative that's very specific to something like this?